Hi everyone. Well, welcome back for day 2 of ECOTS. I'm Michelle Everson and I will be hosting this session. We're very excited to have Mark Isaacson and Milo Shield here from Augsburg College, and they will be presenting on the second statistics course, What Should It Be? So go ahead, Mark. Oh, also, I just wanted to quickly mention, if you have any questions, we're going to be saving them till the end. So please, during the talk, you can type in questions in the questions room, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Okay, Milo, you want to begin? Did we lose Milo?
I still see him online.
Did he somehow get muted?
No, he's not muted. Do you want to get started, Mark?
Yep. So okay. Well, I'll start. I've got his notes. So welcome to our ECOTS webinar on the second stats course. What should it be? And when we say second stat course, we don't necessarily mean the second stat course taken in a sequence by students. We mean the second stats course most strongly promoted by statistical educators in addition to intro stats. And so we're working on a scenario. Say you're authorized at your school to select a second course in statistics in addition to the traditional intro inference-based course. The new course will be funded and all the resources provided for a period of time, and you're considering two options. One is a pre-inference statistical literacy course. The other is a more traditional post-inference advanced topics course. Given limited resources, which one of these two options would you choose for U.S. four-year colleges? And so we'll let you vote, and so Michelle will launch a poll, and we'll take a beginning temperature. So Michelle, can you launch that? So the votes are coming in. While you're voting, I'll do some introductions. My name is Mark Isaacson. I teach at Augsburg College. I teach in the Department of Business Administration and Management Information Systems. I'm arguing that statistical educators should support a pre-inference-based statistical literacy course. In the past, I've designed a completely online course on this subject for Capella. I've also designed and taught a course called Statistical Literacy for Managers. And when I'm talking during the presentation, my slides on the right-hand side will say Stat Lit. Has Milo rejoined us? Well, on the opposite side, we've got Milo Shield, who would be arguing for the post-inference advanced topics course. And so as you go through the presentation and see his slides, on the right-hand side, it'll say advanced topics. And as of right now, the results of the poll, let's see if I can. We've got 90% of the people voting, and it ends up being a 50-50 split in terms of which option people choose. We have 50% voting for the pre-inference course and 50% choosing the post-inference course. So moving on. Let's see here. And for some reason I've lost control here. Michelle, is the poll closed?
Yes, sorry, Mark. Yes, the poll is closed.
Okay. For some reason,
and we're having Milo call back in.
Okay. For some reason, it's not letting me move to the next slide. Any thoughts?
Oops.
Oh, there we go. Now I've got some control back. So there's pictures of the two of us. Sorry. So I'm going to start off with a question that I start off all of my statistical literacy courses with, which is, where do statistics come from? And that when I ask this question to my students, I oftentimes get the look here that I see, that you see in the picture of my daughter on her birthday when I ask them this question. Last year at US COTS, I did a poster presentation of the results of several hundred student responses, and by far the most common response that I get from students when I ask them this question is that statistics come from data. Obviously, there are a lot of answers which could be correct to this question depending on what level of background you come at this question from. And I've also asked a lot of instructors this question. You might think to yourself, how would you answer this question if you were asked? My argument is that there's a need for a pre-course, what I'll call Stat 100, that gives students the background to appreciate and value statistics as a critical consumer. This is certainly a valuable skill needed by those in non-quantitative majors who don't already require statistics, and also for those who are preparing to take the traditional Stat 101 course, where the agenda is often much different. And if we look at the traditional stat textbook, chapter 1 oftentimes is there is data. And then we go on from there to talk about whether it's quantitative, categorical, discrete, continuous, and so forth. But we're always starting off with the assumption that statistics start with data. And I like to tell my students that saying statistics come from data is like saying babies come from hospitals. It's certainly true, and for certain audiences it's appropriate, but it leaves out a lot of the interesting details. If you think about your students on the first day of an intro stat course, you might think about how do they view statistics. Would they describe them as healthy? Would you describe the students as healthy critics of numbers and statistics in the world around them? Would you describe them as completely cynical and untrusting of most, if not all, statistics? Or are they naive and awestruck by numbers and simply believe any number put in front of them? In a recent survey that Milo and I did, Stat Ed instructors estimated that nearly half of their students entering Stat 101 could be classified as naive or awestruck by numbers. And if that's true, the issue is that naive students view statistics as rocks, things that researchers just wade into the waters, pull from the ground as distinct, separate, unchanging objects that we never question. They simply are. We just have to go out and find them. But as we know, statistics come from a process. As Joel Best described in his books on statistics, objects that look like green rocks can be mined from the earth, undergo a bunch of human interventions that result in a sparkling diamond. It's that shiny rock that ends up in a jewelry store for lots of money. Ask students about diamonds, and they won't envision or mention the green rocks in the top picture. They've always seen and experienced diamonds as items for sale in the jeweler's display case. It's much the same for statistics. Students see them as objects in the display case, i.e. the newspaper, media, advertisements, and don't think much about the process of their creation. Statistics become part of the argument that naive students buy without thinking, or cynical students completely dismiss without regard. Students need to understand that statistics start with a question of interest by someone and flow from there. They are really the output of a process for students to evaluate statistics on display as consumers. They need a Stat 100 type course centered around the process from which statistics came. Did Milo join us?
He's not here yet, Mark. I'm sorry. We're trying to get him online.
Okay. So it's not like we lost Milo, so I'll keep filling in for him. Milo's thesis was, if statistical educators are to offer a second course at all four-year U.S. colleges, it should be a post-inference advanced topics course. This is a no-brainer. Most of us have taken a second course or more. You may even have taught a course like this at your school. This idea is not new, so it doesn't require a lot of explanation. Let me review. The inference course doesn't really have time to study the design of experiments. This is a core topic in statistical education. Inference is really just the appetizer that students learn in the intro course. Students need to understand the different sources of variability and how to control them. Any student who doesn't understand the design of experiments is statistically illiterate. But there is more. A statistically educated student must understand multivariate modeling, both linear and logistic. When you get involved with multivariate modeling, we run into the issue of confounding. Confounding requires at least 3 variables and is an important topic in the social sciences and professional studies. We also need to concern ourselves with ANOVA and MANOVA, discriminant factor and cluster analysis. Students that have no idea that these tools exist can't be expected to use them when needed. Students in quantitative majors need more depth if they're to be statistically competent.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Well, great. If statistical educators really love their discipline, they would give wholehearted support for an advanced topics course. Back to you, Mark.
All right. So now I'm arguing for myself. This is Mark again. I'm completely with you on the idea of multivariate analysis. Students realize already they live in a complex world. The idea of looking at things in terms of a single variable just doesn't happen much in their lives other than very simple situations. The idea of contemplating the effect of other factors is too important for them to wait for the second course, if at all. If a student is studying the salaries of professionals in 2 different cities and trying to decide where to live after graduation, they need to think about and know whether the data has been adjusted for differences in the cost of living. If one of my students is comparing salaries in New York City versus Minneapolis for a particular type of job, it may be that the average salary difference between the cities is statistically significant in the raw data, but once I take into account the cost of living and adjust for that confounder, it may not be statistically significant afterwards. To be educated consumers of statistical arguments, students need to understand the concept of confounding and practice thinking about alternate explanations and how they might influence the given data. For many students, the idea that something could be significant in one sense but not in another is a bit of a mind puzzle because they tend to think of statistics as rocks. As statistical educators, it's our job to get students comfortable with the idea of it depends, not only with confounding, where obviously taking something into account or not taking something into account can make an important difference, but also how do I make what changes are made in the process of where statistics come from can also have an influence on the numbers that we calculate. And these things could include how things are defined, how things are measured, how is a population chosen. All of these are choices in the process of where statistics come from. While cynics in a class might think these are all rigged to support a given conclusion, the truth is that decisions have to be made in order to generate statistics. And like all decisions, some are certainly better than others. And so for that reason, students have to learn how to become critical consumers to decipher the good from the bad. A couple of examples. I'll start with a simple question. And say I wanted to know what % of statistical educators are golfers. And if this were a textbook problem, we might just be told that T hat equals X%, and we'd be off and running and doing calculations and formulas. But if we stop and think about what might be the answer to this question, the real answer is it depends. And it depends in part on how I define what a golfer is. And I oftentimes do this in my class, and I can have you raise your hand as I go through. But if I say we define a golfer as someone who's played a round of 18 holes of golf in the last week, how many hands would I see? And on the right-hand side, there's a chance you can raise your hand. If I ask the question and define a golfer as someone who's played a round of 18 holes of golf in the last month, I'm going to get a bigger number. All the people that participated in the last week certainly count, but I've now made the time frame bigger. I get a larger response. If I say the time frame for playing a round of golf to be considered a golfer is in the last year, the proportion gets ever bigger. If I redefine a golfer completely and say it's anyone who's played a round of 18 holes, hit balls at the driving range, or indulged in the game of mini golf ever in their lifetime, I get the biggest response of all. In this particular case, the change of definition leads to a change in proportions. Depending on how far I raise or lower the bar of the definition, I can certainly influence the numbers in a way that would be persuasively significant, and possibly if I used an inferential calculation, it could change the results of statistical significance tests. And similarly, if I look at the comparison of 2 groups, say I wanted to compare whether faculty or students were more responsible drivers, and I look at who has a higher percentage of moving violations. Again, the answer begins with it depends. And again, it depends in part how I define a moving violation, although in the case of the law, there's some pretty standard definitions for that. But if I look at also the time frame, at the same time, it might be that over the last year, the percentage of students who are less experienced, more risk-taking drivers might have a higher percentage of moving violations than those faculty who are more experienced, responsible drivers. But if I say I'm looking at the percentage of people who have gotten a moving violation over their lifetime, and remember that faculty were once young too, it could be that the percentage of faculty with moving violations is actually higher than the percentage of students. Not because they're any worse drivers, but simply they've had more time to accrue a moving violation. In this case, the difference between definitions and results not only might be persuasive, but also statistically significant, and I could actually get a complete reversal of the results. For the naive student, the thought may never have crossed their mind about changing the time frame in the definition. For the cynics, this might be more ammunition that you can make statistics say whatever you want. The goal of my proposed Stat 100 course is to get them to be better thinkers about statistics. And one way to get them to be better thinkers is to get them comfortable with hypothetical thinking. Essentially hypothetical thinking is first deciphering what was done when I encounter a statistic, or trying to, if it's told to us. 2, contemplate what might have been done. And then the hard part, 3, envision how the statistic might change and how changing the definition, changing the time frame, changing the alternate explanation or confounder might change the outcome. And for the mathematician in us, this can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable. It's something that students are rarely called to do in their educational lives. In math classes, we're trained to make assumptions and move forward to calculate the answer. Here we're starting with the presented result and have to work our way backwards and think about what was done and what could have been done. In this particular case, there's oftentimes not just a single right answer. And so what we're trying to do is create students who aren't naive and who aren't cynics. We want to find some balance point in the middle. And in our recent survey that Milo and I did, it turns out that 88% of those people responded said that they agreed with the statement that moving students to the center of the spectrum from naive, awestruck to cynic should be a learning objective of introductory statistics. The current traditional course doesn't quite do this quite so well. Data assumed to be rocks. We're silent on definitions. We focus on calculations. The result of that is we're mathematically competent, but we don't necessarily give students the skills to value statistical arguments. Oftentimes wonder why we remain silent about things we know can make a difference in the results. If we don't teach students these in Stat 100 or Stat 100, who else or where else are they going to learn them?
Well, this is Milo back again on the right side of this argument. Think of all the great topics that need to be covered for our students in quantitative majors. The Monte Carlo simulation could be a whole course in itself, as it could be the data mining, the data analytics. We need to spend much more time with coincidences, given big data. Epidemiology, you can't be educated if you're not exposed to things like epidemiology and demography. Data manipulation, they need to touch data. They need to work on data visualization, no matter what kind of analysis is involved. Next slide. Web analytics is a hot topic today. Avinash Kaushik said, the experiment or die, there is no try. If you have 2 pages you want to test, it takes 6.5 minutes for you to configure, test, and launch an A/B test. Prepare your students for the hottest careers in the web today. Watch the students flock to your classroom. Bottom line, students in the quantitative majors need an advanced topics course. Statistical educators should be unanimous in requiring this post-inference advanced topics course for all students in quantitative majors. Back to you.
And this is Mark again. On the stat lit side, I say students must learn to value statistics, and statistical literacy is really a statistics evaluation course. I don't mean that they appreciate or any of the good things on student attitudes, although that's certainly important, but rather can students know and decipher when they encounter a good statistic and a not so good statistic. I oftentimes like to tell my students that statistics are the jewels used to decorate an argument when somebody wants to try to convince you of something or sell you something. If I'm going to be a competent consumer of items, whether it be jewelry or statistics, I need to be knowledgeable about what it is that I'm buying. When I go out to buy jewelry, I need to know, am I buying a gemstone, a diamond, a ruby, and so forth? Am I buying a piece of colored glass that just looks like a jewel, or am I buying a plastic toy? Again, this is a set of skills that we don't tend to focus on in the traditional Stat 101 course. Whether you're a quantitative major or not, these are valuable skills that all students and future citizens are going to need to possess.
Okay, yeah, Mark, you're kind of cutting in and out, maybe not talking to the microphone. Well, let's cut to the chase here. Here's my point. Students in the quantitative majors need the skills to become productive practitioners. They need statistical competence to flourish in our data-drenched world. Students in quantitative majors need the depth offered in an advanced topics course. The only way to get this is for them to take an advanced topics course. A post-inference advanced topics course deserves your full support. Mark?
And on the statistical literacy side, again, statistical literacy is needed by all, but especially non-quantitative majors who don't currently take a statistics course. We need to convert the naive and the cynics and bring them to become critical consumers. With the proliferation of statistics and data, everyone needs to be better at critically thinking about statistics that are presented by both experts and non-experts out there. Teaching hypothetical thinking isn't an easy skill. It requires a breadth of topics and time to concentrate on these important topics, things that students don't necessarily see or learn in other classes. And as this quantitative literacy movement gains momentum on a number of campuses as a graduation skill, this issue of statistical literacy is a chance for statistical educators to become leaders in the quantitative literacy movement.
Now is the time to vote. We want you to vote again on these two options, the same two options you had initially. Mark, can you bring up the vote here? We've got a pre-inference statistical literacy course, the Stat 100. We've got the post-inference advanced topics course, Stat 201. The second course is offered in addition, funded for 5 years. Which option do you think would be more valuable? Please vote now. We'll be watching the results. Now, we really want to talk about the timing on this. We want to argue that now is the time for statistical educators to get behind offering a course. There's many reasons. Here's 3. The Common Core. More students come to college with good foundation in statistics. What do we offer? We need to have courses in place for this next generation of students. Secondly, the quantitative literacy movement. In 2009, a survey of all U.S. four-year colleges found that almost a fifth that replied said they're offering a course they call statistical literacy. This quantitative literacy is growing as a graduation requirement for all students. The third reason, data, big data, the data deluge, is a reality. The Harvard Nurses Study involves 238,000 nurses. The IRS processes millions of tax forms. Walmart captures point of sale from over 2,900 stores in 6 countries, stores it in their Tetra data warehouse. Alexa ranks 30 million websites. StatEd needs to ride this wave, capture the energy, and provide value-added courses for today's students. Let's look at our results now. Well, I see 62% moved over to the pre-inference course, with 38% staying with the post-inference course. Thank you for voting. Let's look ahead. Maybe this has been a false dichotomy set up by Mark and myself because we love both of these courses. We have a joint conclusion. We really think that statistical educators should be recommending that all students be required to take an additional statistics course. If they're a non-quantitative major, make it statistical literacy. If you're a quantitative major, they should be taking an advanced topics. As a discipline, we should recommend both, develop standards for both, and be evangelists for both. We can't get other majors to do what we want, but we can recommend. Our students deserve nothing less as they take the problem of making better decisions using data. Thank you for listening to our part of the webinar. Mark. Hello, Mark.
Yep, I'm here.
Go ahead.
So we'll now open it up for questions, and I think Michelle is moderating for us, and so if you want to type in any questions.
Yes, and we do have some questions already in the question room, so I'll read you a few of those. Ruth asks, could the traditional statistical inference course include more statistical literacy in it?
I'd say it could, and I was talking with some other stat ed people. They said as the Common Core comes through, we wouldn't have to spend the first 3 weeks on descriptive statistics. We could assume that's a given. That would free up 3 weeks. We might push the whole course forward, 3 weeks at the end for statistical literacy. That's one possibility. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think it could. I mean, the course I teach called Statistical Literacy for Managers is sort of a hybrid where we do cover some of the topics that, follow-on courses might expect us to teach, but I also do spend a fair chunk of time on topics involving the critical thinking and thinking about numbers that aren't part of a traditional course. And so I think there is a possibility that it could be done. Obviously, it's sort of a balance, and you have to make choices about what to cut and what to leave in if you don't have the resources to do two separate courses.
We have
Michelle.
another. Oh yes, we have another question from Abra Brisbane, who asks, or who says, I would argue that statistical literacy should be much more strongly emphasized in the first course in statistics, enabling it to be accessible to both quantitative and non-quantitative majors. Then the second course would be free to focus on advanced topics. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially that's kind of at the heart of my, I mean, I was arguing that non-quantitative majors needed, and certainly that's true, but I think that, you know, the statistical literacy for those people that are going to go on and take a more traditional course, it does provide more of a bridging course to the traditional course. You know, sometimes students get caught up in all the formulas and mathematics and calculations of a traditional inference-based course, and it's hard to keep, you know, your head above water in terms of where are we, you know, using the framework of where statistics come from, and having that idea in the background gives them something to hang their hat on in terms of, well, where am I in this process? It started with somebody who had a question. Now we're, you know, down the road. We've got data that we can apply these tests to. Without that kind of framework, it sometimes makes it more difficult for students in the initial intro course.
My comment, it sounds nice to think of combining them, and I just don't see it. Maybe I'm not that good of a teacher, but I think of all the problems I have with sampling distribution and trying to get them to see what's going on there, and now I'm going to add in confounding, I'm going to add in assembly. It's just almost too much. That inference course is already chock full, and I don't know, to me it takes almost an entire semester to cover some of the other topics. So I just say I haven't been able to do it.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple more questions from Justin Greaves and Lynn Fisher, and they both ask a very similar question about any textbook recommendations for a statistical literacy course.
Oh, the two that are best, Concepts and Controversy, Seeing Through Statistics, Moore and Jessica Utt's books, I'd say are the number two, the top two. The MAA is planning to do a survey this next fall. Like Mark said, a fifth of colleges are offering something called statistical literacy. What text are you using? We've been working on a textbook at Augsburg, but it takes a long time to develop a good text. We all need one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly the ideas of assembly and the idea of definitions changing and so forth. Most of those things don't really exist much in any traditional textbook that I know of. Like Milo said, we've developed some materials or are developing some materials, but it isn't something that I know of something off the shelf that you could just go and buy.
Andrew Ross asks a question. He asks, how do you see these courses relating to AP statistics? If someone had a 5 from an AP stats test, would they get credit for both statistical literacy and Stat 101?
Lynn Steen, a former president of the MAA, argued that just because you'd had calculus, and I think he'd say the same thing about statistics, whether it's the college stat course or the AP stat course, is not at all a guarantee that you're statistically literate. And I think both Mark and I, when we've tried to poll our students at the end of our statistical inference courses, it's like, no, we can't say that you're better at it because of what we do in our regular course. They're a separate set of topics.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think they're two different skill sets. I mean, you can be mathematically competent or very skilled at doing the calculations and understanding what situations to apply which formulas, but yet have very little concept of the ideas of assembly and confounding and changes in definition having a change in the result. You might still view statistics as rocks and get a 5 on the AP stats course.
Ruth asks another question. Ruth Wunderlich. She asks, where does the statistical literacy course end? Is there any inference, any probability, perhaps some simulation?
When I teach it, I do quite a bit on coincidence because that's how the people see statistical inference in the newspaper. You don't see p-value, you may see statistical significance, you may see margin of error on your surveys, but there's an awful lot going on with coincidence, and that's an area I think we need to talk more about as statisticians. So I do quite a bit of that in statistical literacy. As far as inference, it's just overlap or the absence of overlap of confidence intervals.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, any more questions?
Yes, we have one more question, and we do still have a couple of minutes, so if anyone has any questions, and also feel free to raise your hand, we can certainly unmute you. There's a couple more questions in the questions room. Rebecca Barber asks, so why shouldn't I just replace Statistical Inference 101 with Statistical Literacy for non-quant majors? My students get buried in the math and freak out.
Well, I think that's what we're recommending for students in non-quantitative majors, majors where there is not a requirement for a statistics course. English, philosophy, history, yes, statistical literacy is more appropriate than an inference course.
Yeah, and I would agree that. Yeah.
Okay. Rebecca kind of follows that up saying that she's talking about psychology, nursing, etc. I don't know if that changes your response at all.
Nursing is different. They have certain requirements there. That's getting close to a hybrid course, the kind that Mark was talking about that we do for business managers. They need more than just the statistical literacy. They need some more competence issues. So this thing may end up coming in flavors depending on the major.
Mm-hmm. So just a couple more questions we have time for. Andrew Tierman asks, this is a little bit of a long question, do all statistics educators appreciate the concerns of statistical literacy? Is there a plurality of mathematicians under consensus of their pure math departmental colleagues who teach a large percentage of undergraduate introductory non-mathematical statistics and predominantly value calculation, not experimental context? What about these, or what about those among this large component of de facto statistics educators who may not consider statistical literacy to be college-level subject matter, at least for their discipline?
That's a really good point because both math and stat look at the computations the students are doing, the calculations, as one of the ways to know whether a person understands what's going on. If you can't do the calculations, we really wonder. Doesn't mean calculations the whole thing. But going off to areas where a calculation doesn't result in a number, where you can't say yes or no, true or false, valid, invalid, that's a different area. We're into critical thinking, and I think that's a big step for many people in both math and statistics. And I know it took me quite a while to move from one to the other, so I appreciate it totally.
Yeah, I would agree that there is certainly, parts of statistical literacy that make the mathematician in us uncomfortable, as I said. And some of us are more mathematicians than others. But if you lean towards having one single right answer, in a lot of cases, the idea of having multiple right answers, multiple plausible right answers, starts to be a little bit disconcerting. And I've listened to other webinars and presentations where people have talked about related things where there isn't necessarily one correct answer. And the discussion afterwards always comes back to, well, what is the correct answer? And with statistical literacy, there isn't always just one right answer. There's multiple possible right answers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have time for just one more last question. We have a couple of similar questions about how much writing do you include in your statistical literacy course?
I have quite a bit of writing. I feel like that's the output that I'm looking for. If a student can't write coherently about the subject, no, we're not statistically literate. Literacy is about communication. So, yeah, they're writing, they're probably analyzing some 14 news stories in a semester, writing up what do they see, what's the context, what's the comparison, how strong is the evidence, signs of randomness, bias, etc. Writing is central for me.
Mm-hmm. Any last thoughts, Mark, on that?
In the, as I said, the business course that I teach, which is a sort of a hybrid, we have some requirements of doing more calculations in some areas, but I do have them do writing because there are situations where the answer isn't a number. It's taking a look at a situation and how would you communicate this to other people and how would you summarize this data set depending on what you take into account or what you don't take into account. And it's not just a single number, but you have to explain why you chose the way you did and what the other possible choices could have been and what the result might have been. And so you have to do that in words, not numbers.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark and Milo. This was a great presentation, and you handled some of our technical problems very well. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
But We really thank you for being here today. And for those of you in the audience who want to talk more with Mark and Milo, they will be participating in a panel session this Friday at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yep,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you,
you
Michelle
so much.
and Jean.
You had a great presentation, and I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements for everyone on the line. Just a reminder, on Thursday we're going to have recordings of all of our sessions available for you to view. We also wanted to make sure that you know about our virtual poster sessions, and you all should have received an email. It would have been titled your ECOTS Conference Central Access link. You need the link within that email message to actually get to the virtual posters. So if you did not get that email or you can't find it, be sure to contact us at health@cosweb.org and we can send you a new link. And we also just wanted to mention, for any of you on Facebook, we've set up a group on Facebook. It's called ECOTS 2012. If you'd like to join and just talk about ECOTS or share thoughts and questions about the conference. So we'll have another session starting in a few minutes. And we hope you'll stay and join us for that. Thank you very much.